I never thought I'd find myself standing in my mother-in-law Barbara's pristine living room, watching her methodically destroy my son Jason's art portfolio, the portfolio he'd spent his entire senior year perfecting for his interview at the prestigious Art Institute tomorrow morning. "This ends now," Barbara declared, her perfectly manicured hands tearing through page after page of Jason's artwork. "No grandson of mine will waste his life pursuing this nonsense." I stood frozen, watching years of my son's work being shredded before my eyes. His detailed architectural drawings, his vibrant watercolor landscapes, the portrait series that had won him state recognition, all torn to pieces by a woman who spent the last 18 years trying to micromanage our family's lives. "Barbara, stop." I finally found my voice, but she continued destroying the portfolio with the same cold efficiency she applied to everything in life. "Emily, dear," she didn't even look up from her task. "I'm doing Jason a favor. The Matthews men are businessmen, not artists. My husband built this family's legacy in real estate, and Jason will follow in his footsteps." The same speech, the same controlling behavior that had dominated every family gathering, every holiday, every milestone since I married David 20 years ago. But this time, she'd gone too far. I thought about the envelope in my car, the one I'd discovered last month while helping my father-in-law clean out their attic. The envelope that contained Barbara's own artistic past, and the real reason she dropped out of art school in 1982. "What's going on?" David's voice came from the doorway. He'd just arrived from work, still in his suit, briefcase in hand. His eyes widened at the scene before him, his mother surrounded by the shredded remains of his son's portfolio. "Mom, what are you doing?" The shock in his voice was genuine. Even after all these years of watching his mother's controlling behavior, this level of destruction surprised him. "I'm protecting this family's future." Barbara straightened up, brushing paper scraps from her expensive silk blouse. "Jason needs to focus on his business school applications, not waste time with this artistic foolishness." "Where is Jason?" David asked, his face pale. "Upstairs in tears," I replied, my voice shaking with anger. "He came to show his grandmother his finished portfolio, so proud of his work, and she did what needed to be done," Barbara interrupted. "David, surely you understand. You followed the proper path, and look how successful you are." I watched my husband's face and saw the familiar conflict there, the successful real estate developer warring with the little boy who still sought his mother's approval. But before he could respond, Jason appeared on the stairs. My heart broke seeing my 18-year-old son's red-rimmed eyes. His usual confident posture collapsed into defeat. "It's fine," he said quietly. "Grandma's right. I'll apply to business school." "No." The word came out of my mouth with such force that everyone turned to look at me. "No, this ends now." I grabbed my car keys from my purse. "Jason, honey, go get all the pieces of your portfolio. Every single one." Barbara sniffed dismissively. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. What's done is done." "You're right, Barbara," I said, heading for the door. "What's done is done. And it's time everyone knew exactly what was done in 1982. I saw the color drain from her face as understanding dawned. "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me." I was already halfway to my car, my hands steady as I opened the trunk and retrieved the large manila envelope I found in the attic. The envelope marked Barbara Chen, Art Institute Acceptance, 1982. Back in the living room, David and Jason were gathering the torn pieces of the portfolio. Barbara stood rigid, her perfectly controlled facade beginning to crack. "Emily," her voice held a warning note. "Whatever you think you know." "I know everything." I cut her off, opening the envelope. "I know about your acceptance to the Art Institute. I know about your scholarship, and I know about the exhibition that was supposed to launch your career." David looked up sharply. "Mom, what is she talking about?" "Nothing," Barbara snapped. "Ancient history that doesn't matter." "It matters," I said, pulling out the contents of the envelope. "It matters because your mother, Jason, was once exactly where you are now. Except she didn't just get accepted to the Art Institute, she was offered a full scholarship. She was their most promising candidate in a decade." Jason's eyes widened as I handed him the acceptance letter, yellowed with age but still clearly legible. Barbara took a step forward as if to snatch it away, then stopped herself. "And this," I continued, pulling out a newspaper clipping, "is the review of her final high school exhibition. the one where the dean of the Art Institute personally attended and called her the most promising young artist I've seen in 20 years. Mom? David's voice was barely a whisper. You were an artist. Barbara's perfectly controlled expression cracked completely. I was young and foolish. I had dreams that weren't practical. My father, her father, I finished, did exactly what she just did to Jason. He destroyed her portfolio the night before she was supposed to start classes, told her no daughter of his would waste her life on art. The silence in the room was deafening. Jason looked from the old acceptance letter to his grandmother, understanding dawning in his eyes. David stood frozen, staring at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. How dare you? Barbara's voice shook. How dare you bring up ancient history that has no bearing on? No bearing? I laughed incredulously. You just destroyed your grandson's dreams because you're still living out your father's expectations instead of your own. You're still that terrified 18-year-old girl, letting someone else decide your future. I turned to Jason, holding out the final piece of paper from the envelope. This is your grandmother's self-portrait from 1982, the one that won her the scholarship. Jason took the drawing with trembling hands. Even after 40 years, the skill was evident. The young woman in the portrait had Barbara's features, but none of her hardness. Her eyes held dreams, determination, and most strikingly, joy. I said quietly, it's time we all had a very honest conversation about art, dreams, and why some people feel the need to destroy what they once loved most. Barbara sank into her expensive armchair, her perfect facade finally crumbling completely. And as I watched my son study his grandmother's long-buried artwork, I knew this was just the beginning of a long-overdue family reckoning. The silence that filled Barbara's living room was heavy with decades of unspoken truths. My mother-in-law sat in her armchair, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. The carefully constructed image of the perfect family matriarch was crumbling before our eyes. Barbara's voice cracked. I was supposed to start classes on September 15, 1982. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on my armrest. I had everything packed, my supplies, my portfolios, even the little red beard I bought because I thought that's what real artists wore. Jason sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully piecing together the fragments of his own destroyed portfolio while still holding his grandmother's self-portrait. David remained standing, his lawyer's composure wavering as he watched his mother unravel. The night before, Barbara continued, her voice distant. My father called me into his study. He had my acceptance letter on his desk, next to my portfolio. She closed her eyes, lost in the memory. He said, Barbara, art is for dreamers and fools. The Chen family builds legacies. So that's why you pushed me into real estate, David said quietly. Why you insisted I forget about architecture school. Barbara's head snapped up. You wanted to study architecture. Junior year of high school, David replied, loosening his tie. But you said the same thing you told Jason, that Matthew's men are businessmen, not artists. I watched my husband's face as 40 years of his own suppressed dreams surfaced. How many generations of artistic talent had been sacrificed on the altar of practical success? What happened to your work? Jason asked, holding up the self-portrait. This is amazing, Grandma. Your use of light and shadow, the emotion in the eyes. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the young woman from the portrait in Barbara's face. Pride, passion, and pain all mingled together. My father burned it, she whispered. All of it. Every sketch, every painting. He said he was teaching me about the real world. She laughed bitterly. The only reason that self-portrait survived was because my art teacher had kept it for the school gallery. And you let him win, I said, not unkindly. You went to business school instead. I became what he wanted, Barbara acknowledged. Successful. Practical, responsible. Her voice hardened. And I built something lasting, something real, not just pretty pictures that what, Mom? David interrupted. That make people feel something, that capture moments of beauty, that express things words can't say. He walked over to where Jason sat and picked up one of the torn pieces of the portfolio, a detailed architectural drawing of a modern art museum, Jason's proposed thesis project. Look at this, Mom, really look at it. Your grandson didn't just draw a building, he designed a space where art and commerce could coexist, where beauty and practicality complement each other. Barbara's hands trembled as she took the fragment. For the first time, she really looked at Jason's work, not through the lens of her father's expectations or her own buried pain, but with the eyes of the artist she'd once been. She started, then stopped, tears forming in her perfectly made-up eyes. I can see the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright in the organic flow of the design. That's what I was going for, Jason said eagerly, scooting closer to his grandmother. See how the gallery spaces interact with the natural light? I wanted to create a space that feels both grounded and uplifting. I watched as grandmother and grandson began to speak the language of art together, perhaps for the first time. David came to stand beside me, slipping his arm around my waist. Thank you, he whispered, for being brave enough to break the cycle. Barbara looked up sharply at his words. I became my father, she said, the realization seemingly hitting her for the first time. I became everything I hated, everything I promised myself I'd never be. It's not too late, I said gently, to be something else, someone else. But the portfolio, Barbara looked at the scattered pieces in horror, as if truly seeing her actions for the first time. Jason's interview tomorrow. What have I done? Jason stood up, brushing paper scraps from his jeans. Actually, he said, pulling out his phone, I have everything backed up digitally. High-resolution scans of all my work. I was going to show you today, Grandma, how technology and art can work together. Barbara's laugh was watery. Of course you do. You're so much smarter than I was at your age. So much braver. He gets that from his mother, David said, squeezing my waist. No, I corrected. He gets his talent from the Matthews and Chen families. He gets his courage from finally seeing the truth, that it's okay to be who you are, to love what you love. Barbara stood up, smoothing her skirt in a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. But when she spoke, her voice had lost its usual commanding tone. Jason, she said, I'd like to drive you to your interview tomorrow. And she hesitated, then continued, I'd like to show you something first, if we leave early enough. What? Jason asked. There's a storage unit, Barbara said quietly, one my father never knew about, where I kept a few pieces, things I couldn't quite let go of. David's sharp intake of breath matched my own. In 20 years of marriage, I'd never heard his mother mention her art again after that initial destruction. I'd like that, Jason said simply. Barbara nodded, then turned to face me. Emily, I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. For today, for the past 20 years. For letting fear drive your choices, I suggested. Yes, she admitted. And for trying to control everyone else's choices because I couldn't control my own. She walked over to her desk and pulled out a business card. This is the number of an art restoration specialist. Perhaps they can help with the portfolio pieces. Even if Jason has digital copies, these originals shouldn't be lost. As I took the card, I saw something shift in Barbara's eyes, a softening and awakening of something long dormant. And I knew that while the immediate crisis of Jason's portfolio was resolved, we were just beginning to unpack generations of artistic suppression and family expectations. Now, Barbara said, reaching for her phone, let me call Thomas at the Art Institute. He was in my class in 1982, and he's on the admissions board now. It's time I finally had an honest conversation with an old friend about art, dreams, and second chances. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. I sat in the backseat of Barbara's Mercedes, watching my mother-in-law and son navigate their newly discovered common ground as we drove to her storage unit before Jason's interview. It's here, Barbara said, pulling up to a nondescript building. Her hands shook slightly as she entered the code. I haven't opened this unit in almost 15 years. The metal door groaned upward, revealing a space that smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. Barbara reached for the light switch, and we all gasped. The storage unit wasn't just a place for old artwork, it was a time capsule. Easels stood draped in sheets, canvases were carefully stacked against the walls, and in the center, a large portfolio case lay untouched. My refuge, Barbara said softly. Whenever life became too structured, I come here, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to look at old sketches, once or twice to paint. She walked to the portfolio case, running her fingers along its edges before opening it. Inside were dozens of pieces, landscapes, portraits, abstract compositions, all bearing the same raw talent we'd seen in her self-portrait. Grandma, Jason breathed, These are incredible. Barbara pulled out a particular piece, an architectural study of an old Victorian house. I did this one the year your father wanted to study architecture. I couldn't support his dreams openly, but I painted this, thinking of him. David, who had insisted on coming with us, moved closer to examine the painting. That's the house on Maple Street, he said. The one I used to sketch in my notebooks. Yes, Barbara smiled sadly. I saw your drawings. You had such talent, David. I'm so sorry Mom, David interrupted. We can't change the past, but we can change what happens next. Jason had been quietly examining the artwork, his expert eye taking in techniques and styles. Some of these are recent, he said. The paint isn't as aged. Barbara flushed. Yes, sometimes, especially after your grandfather passed, I come here, and well, you be an artist again, I finish for her. She nodded, pulling out a canvas dated just 2 years ago, a stunning abstract piece full of motion and color. I called it Regret in Blue. Fitting, isn't it? I think, Jason said thoughtfully, we should call it Beginning in Blue instead. Barbara looked at him questioningly. Because, he continued, this doesn't have to be about regret anymore. Look at what you created in secret. Imagine what you could do if you were free to create openly. He's right, David added. Mom, you're only 62. It's not too late to be who you really are. Barbara sat heavily on an old stool surrounded by her hidden life's work. But what would people say? The business community, our social circle. They'd say what they always say, I interjected. And it wouldn't matter, because you'd be happy. Jason checked his phone. We have an hour before my interview. Grandma, would you help me set up my digital portfolio? I think we should add something. What do you mean? Your work. My work, side by side, showing the artistic legacy of the Matthews Chen family, not just one piece, but a conversation between generations. Barbara's eyes filled with tears. You want that? I want the real you in my portfolio, Jason said simply. The artist who inspired me even as she didn't know she was doing it. For the next 45 minutes, grandmother and grandson worked together, selecting pieces that spoke to each other across the decades. David and I watched as they created something new, not just a portfolio, but a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what could still be found. As we finally drove to the Art Institute, Barbara reached over and squeezed Jason's hand. Whatever happens in there, I want you to know something. What? You're braver than I ever was, and you've given me back something I thought was lost forever. What's that? Jason asked. Permission to dream again. The interview lasted 2 hours. When Jason emerged, his face was glowing. They want to offer me early admission, he announced, and they want to talk to Grandma about a possible faculty position in their adult education program. Barbara's perfectly composed face crumpled into genuine joy. They what? Thomas was quite impressed with your recent work, Jason grinned, said it's time for Barbara Chen to finally take her place at the Art Institute. As we celebrated over lunch, I watched Barbara gradually transform. The rigid posture softened, the calculated speeches gave way to genuine laughter, and when she spoke about color theory with Jason, her eyes sparkled with the same joy I'd seen in her self-portrait. Emily, she said as we were leaving the restaurant, thank you. For being brave enough to open that envelope. For being strong enough to face my anger. For helping me remember who I was meant to be. Just promise me one thing, I replied. Anything. The next time you want to destroy someone's art, come paint with them instead. Barbara laughed, a real laugh, free from pretense. I promise. In fact, I think it's time to clear out my formal dining room. No one uses it anyway, and it has the best natural light in the house. A studio? Jason asked excitedly. A studio, Barbara confirmed. For all of us, even your father, if he wants to finally try his hand at architecture. As we drove home, I thought about how sometimes the greatest art comes from healing old wounds, from bridging generational divides, from finding the courage to be who you truly are. And in the back seat, grandmother and grandson were already planning their first joint exhibition.